International Relations at Webster Vienna Private Uni. But, that's his official title. I call him a professor of common sense. I think of him as the people's philosopher. If Ralph's understanding of the way things are in the world could be bottled for a spiritually thirsty world, I'd make a fortune. Good to see you again, Ralph.
Good to see you, Neil. You're making me blush. I'll try to live up to
you deserve it. You deserve it. To get right into it, Ralph, today I'm thinking about tipping points, and I'll tell you why. Because I wonder if they even exist in society. Maybe you think they do, maybe you think they don't. There's always this assumption that a lot of people hold that eventually one thing piled on another will pass a point of no return, and the people will declare enough's enough and we require change. But I must admit, I begin to wonder if that will ever happen. And second of all, if it ever did happen, what would it even look like? And I'm asking you that particular question, which is not necessarily a new question, but I'm asking you in the context of, I would say that we're beginning to see the Donald Trump, President of the United States, MAGA, Make America Great Again, that mythology beginning to look increasingly hollow, as if it's not ever going to deliver on the optimism and the promises of the election campaign. You've got the big, beautiful bill going through that's going to push the national deficit to $37 trillion, as if that number even really means anything. More money than ever for the Pentagon, more money than ever before. And then notoriously, this announcement from the DOJ and the FBI that when it comes to the Jeffrey Epstein story, that there's nothing more to see here. I wonder, do you believe that we will ever get to the point where the people, the Trump base or whoever, say that's it?
Well, let's put it this way. You are currently in Scotland. I'm in Austria. Donald Trump, of course, is, I assume, currently in Washington or wherever he is. And I would argue that also for the people that listen and watch this show, Donald Trump has always been more of an inspiration. And what I mean by this, similar to what happened with Brexit in the UK, a demonstration that change can be possible. Again, maybe not the kind of fundamental change that we are desiring, but let's call it a glimpse of hope that change is possible. Maybe that's a better way to put it. Was he ever going to deliver everything that we have hoped for, or that his voters have hoped for? I think this was always a little bit of a stretch. Was it better than the possible alternatives? And unfortunately, this is how we often deal with in the realm of politics, right? It's not the perfect candidate or the perfect administration. It is what administration do you have and what would have been the possible alternatives. And from that perspective, I think that the Americans still made the right choice compared to the options we had in Austria, we have in Germany, you had in the UK between the Tories and Labour. I think because there you were in a situation where pretty much every choice was the wrong choice because nobody at least pretended that they would represent the interest of the people. Now, the Epstein thing is, I find that fascinating. I mean, it's I'm not somebody who easily falls into conspiratorial thinking, but if you have a situation, as our common friend Mark Stein has commented recently on his homepage, so you have a situation where you have two security guards who fall asleep, so a sudden onset of narcolepsy in the federal detention system in the United States. You have somebody who was on suicide watch and was supposed to be checked in on every 30 minutes. Somehow that stopped happening 6 days before he quote unquote killed himself. Then you had malfunctions with all the cameras. I mean, there's this thing, as Abraham Lincoln said, fool me once, shame on me. No, what, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. I mean, fool me 4 times in a row, it's like, a million shame on us. And now you have Alan Dershowitz, of all people. Whatever one thinks about Alan Dershowitz, who is a controversial figure, let's say, in his own right. I mean, some people probably know him. I think he was part of the defense team of O.J. Simpson. So, it's an illustrious figure, if you want. And he was also, as far as I know, wrongfully accused of having been involved in the procurement or the use or the abuse of underage girls by Jeffrey Epstein. But he recently in an interview claimed that he knows for a fact, but for legal reasons cannot reveal it, that there is something resembling the ominous Epstein list. And the point is whether it's a physical list that is written down or whether it's a computer file, I find it absurd okay, maybe it really is, there is nothing, but I find it weird. You know it, I know it. Everybody who does anything these days has some form of bookkeeping. So even if you're a criminal, right, even if you do something unspeakable as Jeffrey Epstein, that there is no paper trail, and that he, as far as I know, this is the last number that I heard, that it's not in the hundreds, but it's up to 2,000 girls that have been abused. That was all him. And Prince Andrew, which apparently this was a two-man thing between him and Prince Andrew. So I fully agree. That strikes me as very, very odd. On the other hand, I mean, there are people like Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi. I'm just, why all of a sudden would they change course? And they did start into all of this claiming that they will, that the truth shall be revealed. And I fully agree. This is very, very odd. Could it be imaginable that it is like Murphy's Law, that there are times where everything that can go wrong goes wrong, and you truly had the two guys falling asleep and the cameras malfunctioning and nobody checking in Epstein? I guess it is hypothetically possible. I had a conversation recently with Peter Boghossian, who said, if you know how the detention system works, this is absolutely within the realm of the possible. Maybe, I'm speculating just as you are, but this just strikes me as very odd.
So I bring you back again to the idea of a tipping point. So many within the so-called Donald Trump MAGA base, there was so much talk. Obviously, you would say that the more important talk would have been around war in Ukraine, would have been around the economy, would have been around the climate hysteria. But there's no getting away from the fact that people were deliberately excited. They were made excited about the Sean Combs, the Diddy tapes, the prospect of knowing who and what was on those, and perhaps more pertinently, the Jeffrey Epstein tapes. This was all going to be revealed, and we've all seen the footage of Pam Bondi saying, yeah, there is a list and it's on my desk, and so on and so on, and Dan Bongino and Kash Patel and others speaking as though they knew of the existence of a list of names. We've all seen lists, things have come out on social media seeming to be some of the names on that list. And that now, Donald Trump sitting, ridiculing a journalist in the company of Pam Bondi saying, are you still talking about this guy, this creep? There's nothing to see here. At what point, or is there a point at which the base says, well, that's it. I will no longer be waiting for the knight in shining armour. I will no longer be living in expectation of the cavalry coming over the hill, sounding their bugles to rescue me.
Well, I think you said something very important now, which is none of us should be waiting for the knight in shining armour. And what I mean by this, there's a famous saying by Milton Friedman, which is don't wait for the right politicians, but create the conditions under which the wrong politicians have to do the right thing. And I think that's a very good way to look at it, however that might be possible. Now, in the case of Trump, what I would say slightly in his defense is, as I said previously, I think one has always to look at what were the alternatives.
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private Internet Access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cybercriminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C-18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. but PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private internet access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GB News discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GB News to start protecting yourself digitally today.
Now, as much as I'm in this particular case, I'm as disappointed as you are. But if you say, for example, the MAGA base would say, or those who voted for him would say, okay, this is it, right? We are disappointed, we turn our backs on the system, we turn our backs on Trump. Okay, but then what does that mean? What would then happen? And there have been, and I fully agree with you and others, it's not as overwhelming as I would have hoped. It's not as much as one would have hoped for. But take some of the recent decisions, for example, by the Supreme Court. Again, even the Supreme Court does not always decide how we would want it. But imagine he would not have won in 2016. And it would have been an even more left-leaning or less center-right court than it is now. I think many decisions, for example, whether it is in the transgender issue, whether it is on the question, can regional or local courts make injunctions that are valid nationwide? There will be a decision on birthright citizenship, all things that are important. Can the president deport? Right? All these kind of things, where in many cases, not in all of them, but in many cases, this Supreme Court has decided in Donald Trump's favor. Again, not 10 out of 10 cases, but in 7, 8 out of 10 cases. And this would not have been the case under a Clinton presidency. And I think the same is true if we would have had another 4 years of Joe Biden. As I said, very often, and I'm not happy with this, and I don't want to anger your viewers, but very often it is a choice between the bad and the worst. And under these conditions, I still think that Donald Trump was the right choice. Plus, I think in all fairness, some expectations were very difficult to satisfy. And one of them was that the United States can completely and entirely retreat from the world, from the global scene. This is not as easy, I think, as many at his base were hoping. The world and the United States are a little bit, and we can go into greater detail, they're a little bit like Siamese twins. So they're intertwined both economically and in other areas to such an extent that simply saying, that's it, you guys are on our own, we are on our own, we no longer care about you. That's not that easy. And I think Donald Trump, for all his flaws, understands this. He's trying to extricate the United States from these dependencies when it comes to supply chains, when it comes to China, when it comes to resources, all these kind of things. But that takes more time, I think, that people very often realize. I give you a concrete example. So Donald Trump has realized, or his administration has realized, that when it comes to critical minerals, resources, commodities, rare earth, what have you, the United States depend too much on foreign countries and particularly refining capacity of China. So he went in, he said, we put a 50% tariff on copper and we're going to revive the domestic American copper industry. In principle, a great decision. I completely support it. But in order to rebuild a domestic mining and processing industry, like signing the tariffs into law or announcing the tariffs, that's the easy part. The rebuilding of the industry, that's the really difficult part. And that's also a lesson for the UK and the continental Europeans. Once you destroy an industry and you say, oh my God, we have to bring it back, whether it's coal and steel in the UK, shipbuilding, you name it, things where the UK were great in the past. Once this is gone, just bringing it back with a stroke of the pen doesn't work. But I think the instincts that Donald Trump has are the right ones. So I'm willing to give him credit in some of these areas.
But why? But I hear all of that and I agree with all of that. And I understand the Sisyphean almost extent of the effort that would be required to recreate something that has been allowed to die. In terms of industry, you practically had a cushion held over its face until it did die.
Very true. Very true.
But to get back to, and it sounds, it's being made now by Trump's latest statements to sound trivial, that so much was put on the Epstein client list. So much that was made absolutely the exemplar of the corruption, the worst of the stinking froth floating on the surface of the swamp. And everyone on that side of the fence seemed to be accepting that there was a list of names. And now to come out and say so quickly, no, there never was a list of names. There's no little black book. There is no list. There was no blackmail. And he simply committed suicide. And that's all there is to it. That seems to me to be much more, or let me rephrase that. That seems to me to be deliberately spitting in the face of the people and simultaneously sending out a message that says to the people that are on that list, that we all know are on that list, don't worry, we've got your back. Just as the other side, just as Kamala Harris or whoever would have had your back, we have got your back. And that to some extent, it's precisely because of what you did that we will protect you. Not because of what you did, we will bring you down. It's almost precisely because of what you did that you will remain safe and we will look after you. That it's not superficial. It's not cosmetic. It's not something that could just be set aside. That they went too far in making the existence of the Jeffrey Epstein client list and their promised commitment to reveal it and deal with all of the consequences, no matter who or what got burnt, that to just turn around and say there was never anything there.
Oh no, I agree.
So again, I say, do the people just say, "Oh well, that's the way it is," or would this not be the kind of point that might be reached where enough people would say that is across the Rubicon?
No, I think to go very much to the question you just asked, I think you're correct. And what everybody is speculating, because it happened in the past, is everybody will be upset. The caravan, the attention caravan moves on, and we no longer talk about it in 2 or 3 weeks. And they did this with other things in the past. I mean, think about COVID, right? Think about the vaccinations. Think about all these things. We all know that what happened in this realm was absolutely horrific, but pretty much a significant, not everybody, but a significant part of the media and the political elite just shrugs their shoulders and says the same with migration. Says, oh, well, that happened in the past. Sure, not everything was on the up and up, but who cares anymore? I think that is very, very true. And I think the question of your tipping point is, can they do this again? Or is there a point where the people will say, you know what, you have done this with migration, you've done it with COVID, you've done it with the economy, but there is now one bridge too far, one ignorant cover up, if you want, too far. No, I think that is an absolutely fair point. I think the only problem I see is, as you mentioned, I mean, everybody, even JD Vance, the same thing. Just a year ago, everybody says we need to get to the bottom of this, exactly as you described it. Like there is something going on. We know. I mean, Pam Bondi said, and now she says she was misunderstood. I mean, we have the tapes where she said, "I have the list on my desk." I'm sorry, if you're an attorney, I expect you to know how to use words. If I say to you, Neil, I have a list of our viewers on my desk. And then I say, oh no, I didn't mean a list of our viewers. I meant I have a lot of paperwork on my desk. No, that is not what I said. And I think you're absolutely right. That's the case there. They created an expectation that these things are there, the information is there. And now they come out and say, as you said, no, there's nothing there. And the argument to say the FBI, listen, the FBI was involved from, we remember all the Russia hoax and everything. So I'm sorry, the FBI is not a trustworthy institution. So if this is the mask to which you want to nail your flag, I'm sorry, it's not going to be enough. Then make everything transparent. Of course, not the names of the victims, but one argument was just to kind of really show the absurdity that it's again, this was from Mark Stein. Credit where credit is due. That it's a 200-page document. Are you kidding me? Like the biggest case of the last 20 years, the file is 200 pages. There are windmill approval documents that have 36,000 pages. But when it comes to probably one of the largest sex trafficking rings in modern American history, you have a file of 200 pages. It is so blatantly not credible that I'm part of those people that I say, I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. On the other hand, however, should this be the only, it should be a critical, should this be the only yardstick by which we measure the Trump presidency? Like, will we say in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years that the two Trump the two Trump periods, the 8 years, that this was the defining moment. It will be one of the defining moments, but I struggle with saying it will be the defining moment.
But then at the same time, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which is the whole atmosphere of Trump on his way in was that he was going to make things better, make America great again, and implicit in all of that was that you would think he was going to start dealing with the deficit and the debt and all of the rest of it. The Big Beautiful Bill, which pushes the US deficit or debt, whatever you want to call it, the national debt, to 37 trillion, which quite frankly is almost a nonsensical number. It's a number that you can say, but when it comes to conceptualizing the reality of it, it's how big is the universe?
Yes.
He came in on as the peace president yet again. Everybody from Woodrow Wilson onwards has achieved the White House by promising peace, and then they destroy their presidencies by prosecuting further wars. And he was going to end the war in Ukraine quite straightforwardly. He was going to speak to all the necessary parties, and he was going to bring that to a conclusion. Not at all. And now he's promising more spending than ever before on the Pentagon, so that he becomes the antithesis of his own promises. So it's not obviously the Epstein client list is just one ingredient in a very disturbing cocktail. But to move it on, you and I are both on the European side of the Atlantic day to day, and still in the realm of tipping points. The recent story about the dawn raids in Germany, 170 people, woken up in the early hours. Long story short, because they had been insulting towards politicians. They had posted or aired opinions in some way or in some form, and they were rounded up and charged. At what point, again, in the context of tipping points, do people say we cannot have this? This has all the darkest echoes and reminders of the worst days of the 20th century. This is the on-ramp to the motorway that goes to that place. And so I ask again, are tipping points real, or will people just absorb indefinitely?
Okay, let's unpack it step by step. Now, if we look at the United States, there is one issue that I find a little bit disturbing also on, let's say, people that both you and I sympathize with, which is this idea that is, I think, sometimes prevailing both on the left and on the right, that with the exception maybe of the United States and Israel, nobody in the world has agency. And I think a good example for this is the war in Ukraine. Because the thing is, ultimately, Russia and Ukraine have a say in whether or not and how this conflict is going to end. And I think Donald Trump also believed if he goes in, he picks up the phone, he calls Vladimir Putin, he calls Zelensky, and he can get them to the table within 24 hours, and he will hash out the deal and all of this will be over. But that only works if both sides want it. And I think it has become quite clear. And again, we can have a long conversation why this war happened in the first place. That's a complex issue. But at the time of speaking, I think both sides don't really have any intention to end this war within a very short time frame, because I think both sides still think that they can bring themselves in a better final position or in a better position for negotiations. So none of them seems to be sincerely interested in ending this as soon as possible. And even the American president, unless of course he says, we completely retract all support, we pretty much allow the Russians to roll over the Ukrainians, that would be an option. But if this would be ultimately in the interest of the United States, I don't know either. I mean, it's an option, but I think this is an important thing. The same in the relationship between the United States and China, and the United States and Iran and other places. In every conflict, the other side has a say as well. And this is, we Europeans, by the way, are the same. We constantly believe that the only people with agency is us. But this world is over. The whole point of multipolarity, whatever one thinks about this concept, is precisely that now other players in the world also have agency and also have a say. So this is the one thing. So the idea that the United States will either easily solve all of the world's problems or completely retreat and not be affected by the world's problems, I just think it's not realistic. And just as a quick reminder, whatever one thinks, which I think was a disaster, there's no disagreement from me on that front, but when George W. Bush, who I also don't think was a great president, who was not a great president, but nonetheless, when he came into office, he actually wanted an isolationist foreign policy. Like he actually did not sound that dissimilar originally to Donald Trump, right? He said, we have the United States cannot be the world's police. We have to retreat from the globe, all these kind of things. And unless of course, one can believe that 9/11 was an inside job, let's, for the sake of argument, say it was not an inside job. The United States were dragged back into the international sphere, even though the president didn't want it. It is within the nature of the world's great powers that they tend to be dragged into, let's say, the global conflagrations wherever they happen. If China should overtake the US and become the new power, let's say, in Asia or maybe globally, the same thing is going to happen to China, because whenever there is a conflict, the conflict parties will pick up the phone and call the biggest guy on the block. And if you happen to be the biggest guy, the same was the case with the British Empire, at some point they're going to call up you.
Do you think, Ralph, to get it down to brass tacks, do you think, and I'm not Xi in China, I'm not so sure, but when it comes to Macron in France, Scholz in Germany, Starmer in Britain, even Trump in America, do you accept that those individuals, as elected representatives of, in inverted commas, the will of the people, are what they are advertised as? Or, as I quite openly believe now, that they are just factotums, that they are just actors, that they just deliver lines that are scripted for them from elsewhere? Do you invest any of these individuals with credibility?
No. Trump, I do, right? Maybe people will call me a sucker for it, but I think that Trump is trying to do his best. I don't agree with everything, as we just said, as the outline of this conversation. There are many things I'm unhappy with. I still believe that given all the other options, he was the best choice the Americans could make. And I do sincerely believe that he and his administration tried to do their best, even though we might not agree with everything that they're doing. Now, if we switch over to Europe, what we have in Europe at the moment is a managed democracy. I think that's the best way to describe it. And the interesting thing is, everybody always likes to make this comparison to the 1930s. And there are areas where it is appropriate. You mentioned what happened in Germany. There are a few more stories coming out of Germany just as we are speaking that I'll share with you in a second. But before we go there, if we look back into the 1930s, one of the things that happened at that time, to a larger extent also in the UK, was political mass mobilization, at least temporarily. Like, people were out on the streets, people were demonstrating. There were tipping points, if you want, right? People were actually being mobilized. What we experience right now, and I think there we can connect those 2 points that you just made about the kind of the performance aspect of democracy and whether or not there are tipping points. I think this managed democracy is designed precisely to prevent those tipping points by demobilizing and demoralizing the electorate. That's the very difference to the 1930s, right? In the 1930s, these new political parties or these political movements, they wanted to mobilize the people. What we see now is the very opposite, right? Pretty much everybody tries to demobilize the people. And this goes back to what you mentioned about the Macrons and the Starmers, that their argument is, and they're supporting this by the media, is, there are no alternatives. This is what they're saying, right? There are no alternatives. Oh, you think that Nigel Farage or that the AfD in Germany or that Le Pen, that they could think differently, but they can't. Listen, I don't know. Maybe they can. Maybe we should give them a chance, but they try to preemptively make this not happen by saying they can't do anything. The world is precisely as it is and there's nothing you can do. So sure, if you go to vote, like vote for the established, vote for members of the Uni Party, or which they would even prefer, I think, don't go vote at all, right? Sit in your, if you can still afford housing or a flat or an apartment, stay at home, watch a little bit more Netflix, order some foods to get delivered, order something on Amazon. But why engage with politics? Why engage with the community? This is, and we talked about this on your show many times, this is the most insidious thing that happens on the European scene, much more I think than on the American scene. On the European scene, particularly in the UK, you demoralize, you demobilize, and last point, and this is truly the terrible one, and those who are neither demoralized nor demobilized, those you punish. And those, as you mentioned, that's the AfD. That's people who post on the internet. That's what we currently see in one state of Germany where, and this is from yesterday, like, it's official policy, that they try to prevent members of the AfD from being public servants or teachers, which is literally, not metaphorically, literally going back to what the Nazis did, right? No Jews and no social democrats within the German bureaucracy. Now, 80 years later or 90 years later, you have no members of the AfD in the bureaucracy, which is the largest opposition party. And this is just the last point, right? Because this is the true challenge that we have, that you can, the state allows you to retreat, but it does not allow you to mobilize. So we are in it's not totalitarian in the, brown shirts, although in some areas it goes to this, as you described before, where you have the ring at the door at 8 a.m. and people say, so I heard you insulted a Green politician or an SPD politician on the internet. So we are getting gradually there as well. But much more than that, it is this idea to say, yeah, you could engage, but it's stressful. You could get the call. The police might show up. They confiscate your laptop. So why do it? Is it really worth it? You can't do anything anyways. And that's the insidious thing, the demobilization of the electorate.
I completely agree with that idea of the deliberate motivating, demoralizing, demobilizing of the people. Which brings me to another point. The mood music in Britain, and I'm interested to hear what it is in where you are, is of conscription. Keir Starmer, that word keeps floating around.
Yes.
The idea that Britain has to be on a war footing as never before, as first time in a couple of generations, we have to be ready to face the enemy. And I wonder exactly what is being done there, because I wonder if it is in fact an example of Orwellian doublespeak, that the preparations are being made to put in place the infrastructure of increased militarism, and it's being done under the disguise of it's being directed at the enemy outside. But I wonder at the extent to which it's just running cover for a perceived necessity, perceived by the authorities, to put in place that infrastructure, that militarism, not to deal with an external foe, but to contemplate civil unrest. That the machinery is being put in place in the expectation that there might be trouble, not from outside, but at home. And I wonder if what you think about that, and if you see or if you hear and listen to similar mood music where you are.
There is, and it's interesting you mentioned this. So in Austria we still have conscription. So I served in Austria. That's not even a debate because it still exists. In Germany they have the very same debate, and a newspaper recently published a statistic about how many members of the parties in parliament have actually done voluntary service in the army. So in the AfD it's 39%, and in the Greens, who are currently pushing the strongest for conscription, it is 0%. And to put a potentially different scenario on the table is, if you bring back conscription, the people that will most eagerly sign up for it, I would expect at least, would be those who support the AfD, would be the ones who support Le Pen, would be those who support, I think in Britain you have the Reform Party or the Restore movement. Because at the end of the day, you're right, but you cannot have militarization without some form of patriotism. So this idea, I could not agree more with you. And sometimes I'm befuddled by how detached and incompetent the ruling elites are. You have somebody like Merz in Germany, like Starmer in the UK, like Macron in France. And their idea is that you can tell the people, so we have told you now for 30 years that there is nothing worse than patriotism, nationalism, loving your country, the worst thing in the world. You cannot do it. But now, to fight a foreign war against a foreign enemy, we are willing to force you into the army. As you talked about tipping points, I would argue that could potentially be the setup for a tipping point, because nobody in their right mind understands this. The same people, and the UK is an important example here, the same people that have been scolding you, that have been dragging you to court if you were putting up a Union Jack or a St. George's cross in your window, are now asking you to fight under a foreign country's flag in a faraway place. And I don't think that many people in Britain, in Germany or elsewhere are going to fall for it. So the idea to put arms in the hands of the very people, or the idea of the elites to put arms into the hands of the very people that despise them the most, good luck with that. I think this is very risky on their behalf.
When you say risky, I do think it's very risky, because I think what it could make people see, make people aware of, invite people to contemplate, is the reality of what was behind the world wars of the 20th century. You know, I think enough time has passed, and if not now, then soon. You know, with the eventual death of the generations that actually fought and lived through those times, that the load-bearing myths are going to collapse. And I think more and more people will come to terms with the terrible reality of those wars, 1 and 2, having been bankers' wars. You know, having been engineered and prosecuted for economic reasons rather than for anything else. And I think raising the spectre now of a third World War is a very risky maneuver, because, as you say, the generation that would have to be expected to bear the brunt of it, Generation Z or whatever, have been completely demoralised, demobilised, demotivated. They've been raised to be unpatriotic. They've been raised to think that their cultures and their histories, you know, their traditions, even their families are outmoded, if not downright shameful. I think it's a very risky play to make, you know, so that again, I do wonder if there's any authenticity in it at all, or if it isn't just the authorities, you're contemplating militarising and laying in place infrastructure, because what they fundamentally fear is not an enemy without, but an enemy within, which is the people.
I think that's true. Although, if we take the World War I and World War II, and we can have a conversation about what the causes were, but I think whatever the causes were, I don't think it diminishes the heroism of those who fought in it. And
no.
Right, so this was a generation, I think, in many ways that still deserves our respect and our admiration. And I have nothing. And by the way, I don't just mean this. I mean it towards the British, but I mean it towards the Russians. I mean it towards the Germans. I think those who had to march into this storm because they were called upon by their countries for whatever reasons, right? And I completely agree with you. Many of them might have been shady. I think was on their behalf, a very noble and honorable thing to do. And I would even go so far and say that in 1914 and even in 1940, I would say in many ways, intentionally or unintentionally, there was a Britain that was worth fighting for. And I think that this was how people at the time, or at least many, perceived it. I think this is when we become nostalgic about the past. This is always when we have these conversations, right? I get so many emails from people in the United Kingdom that say, I'd be happy to fight for my country, but not given the current condition it is in, right? Why would you fight for politicians that cannot even bring themselves to say publicly that they love their country? I mean, Keir Starmer said one smart thing, I would say, which was when he said that the UK is in the process of becoming an island of strangers. How long did it take him that he had to take that back? Like
5 minutes.
5 minutes. So this you can almost set the clock right whenever one of these politicians says something that actually would resonate with the majority of the British people. And again, the British are just like a stand-in here. That's true all over the place. It takes them 5 minutes to take it back. And I have to admit, if I would be a British, a young man, a young woman in my early 20s or something, would I die for Keir Starmer? I'm sorry. The man who takes a knee, a man who apparently thinks that for whom apparently BLM and whatever happens in the United States is more important than what's happening in the UK.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about them: Starmer, Macron, Merz, whatever. These people are not. They're not believable. in
No,
any
not
sense.
at all.
And I would only agree with you 100% that the people who gave their lives were honourable, and they did it from the deepest well of patriotism and the determination to defend family and to defend whatever. But that was a bank account, that which was drawn upon at that time, in 1914 to 1918, 1939 to 1945, 46. That was a bank account that had been built up over thousands of years. You know, that was
Yes.
and in the same way that, for example, Britain and the British Empire bankrupted itself through all the family silver, through all the accumulated material treasure into that war and never got it back, lost all of it. That moral, that patriotic, that belief, that faith, that love of country that had been built up legitimately over, millennia, was also spent. So that now, if there was to be a third world war, or whatever you wanted to call that conflagration, it would have to be spun and conjured from a different source, because that's bankrupt. That account is in the red, never mind emptied. So all of that. But I just wonder if what we're talking about, again, to come back to tipping points, if it doesn't get to the point where enough people finally realise that there's a moral bankruptcy that has been inflicted upon them, but to some extent, unfortunately, we have to accept it, that we have been party to, because in the name of convenience and in the name of easier lives and in the name of safety from whatever bogeyman we've had presented to us, we have all to some extent been complicit in it. If there isn't, can't there be, won't there be, will there be a tipping point where people say, no, we can't just keep on reheating this food that has gone off.
But I think we already are, in some areas at least, to bring a little bit of an optimism into our conversation. We are past the tipping point in some areas, and there are, let's say, small cracks of light in the whole thing. Take the UK, for example. So first you had the Reform Party, which I always had my issues with Nigel Farage. I'm a foreigner, and I would never tell the British what to think of their, well, not more than I dare to, what they have to think about their politicians. But I always consider Nigel Farage to be a one-man show. And I think you cannot save the UK as a one-man show. But he did kind of, bulldoze away for something that you see now, this new movement that I think is called Restore Britain. And I like very much what I'm hearing from them. They speak a plain language. They don't mince their words. They say many things I'm fully in agreement with. And such a movement, speaking publicly the way they do, would have been unthinkable 10 or 15 years ago. So something is happening. I also agree with you that a lot of this cultural social capital has been spent, has been wasted. But the potential for it is still there. The British people did not. I think, as I said, this is the insidious thing about the demoralization. Like we have been told, and I do it too, right? This is not an attack on you or anybody else, but we also then perpetuate this idea that it's kind of all over, and we, there once was greatness, and now it is all. We live in the final stages, and we just try to get through. I don't want to believe this. A different world, and hopefully a better one, is possible. That's the way in which you can make any reform impossible is if you tell those who want change and reform that it's impossible, it makes no sense, there's nothing that can be done about it. And as long as we believe this, it's true, nothing can be done about it. But I don't. I think that the things that once made Britain great, they can come back. This is absolutely still possible. With every passing day, it will get more difficult, but I refuse to believe that it is impossible.
I don't believe it's. I don't think it's impossible either. But I get frustrated, and it almost breaks my heart actually when I see people turning to the same toxic, utterly corrupted systems and machinery. And I think unless and until people face up to the fundamentals, that the absolute corruption of the fiat money system, that the creation and control of inverted commas money is in money out of nothing, is in the hands of private businesses. And I do believe that Parliament, to take the UK example, I think until relatively recently, perhaps up until the middle of, the early part of the 19th century, that Parliament was structured, courtesy of the Constitution, in such a way that it could hold government to account.
Yes.
But that the advent of the party system from the time of Disraeli onwards has utterly corrupted Parliament. That Parliament is not usable because of the party system. The pantomime of voting in general elections and national elections is embarrassingly pointless, and so that those fundamentals have to be addressed. I'm all in favour of getting back to merry old England and getting back to the greatness that was Britain, but almost ever since the Whig revolutions of 1644 and 1688, and then all the way through, and then the advent of the party political system within, that has utterly neutered Parliament. I would be optimistic if people would embrace the bigger conversations, that the money system has to be thrown out and completely rethought. You get back to basics, and throw out the party political system as being a corruption, and to accept, to get back once again to the principle of representation, the individual, the sovereignty of the individual. We have to get back to some of these things. I'd be optimistic about that. But when you talk about reform but they're talking about picking up these toxic tools and expecting to do something healthy with them.
No, I completely agree, and I would even go more into detail so that also your viewers know that we are not just kind of talking about theory here, but have actual ideas. I think one of the first steps that has to be done, and this is, by the way, just as a side note, something I believe that Donald Trump is at least attempting, is that we in Europe, in the UK, we have to become economies again that produce something, but something tangible, exactly yes. As you say. I mean, if you say, the city of London, and it's all financial, artistry and make believe, and it's whatever it is, a stable coin and wild constructs of what they did during the great financial crisis, where you then have all these weird packages of high risk and low risk assets or non-assets and toxic assets and zombie banks and too big to fail and systemic. Yeah, I completely agree with you. There is no point in being a country that has the largest banks in the world but doesn't have a single steel mill, because it's ultimately, and this is what we see, for example, in countries like Russia and China, which have their own problems, but at least they still produce things. They still have steel and they still have manufacturing. There is stuff that is made in China, and to a lesser extent that is made in Russia. How many things are still made in Britain, right? How many things are still made in Germany? They still some, right? It's not down to zero, but it's nothing compared to what it was in the past. And by the way, this brings us back to the demoralization part. The population must have the opportunity to partake in work that has meaning, that creates something, where you can see the world that is then shaped by your labor. This is the one part where Marx was right, when he said that labor is not just about survival, having an income or walking like Oliver Twist with a little bowl and asking for a little bit more. It is to actually be part of a larger thing, not to be a small cog, or even if you're a small cog in the machine, but that you see that this machine is actually doing something, that it does something. And this is where we have to get back. We need to become, exactly as you say, forget this whole financial fart craft or whatever you want to call it, and go back to actually producing something. Steel, concrete, glass, you name it, made in Britain. I could not agree more. And this is, again, part of the demoralization story, which is they put the wool over our eyes, like somebody like Mr. Miliband, who, I'm not in the UK, so I can say it. This person is, to me, a borderline criminal. What if somebody murders the UK economy? What do you call that? This is if you make life unaffordable for millions of people. If this is not a crime, to be quite honest, what is? And this is, again, the absurdity. And this is how our conversation started in the past. This is the other thing, right? It's the war footing, but it's also the climate madness, both of which is resulting in the impoverishment, both morally and economically, of the population. And then we have to ask the question, going back to what you said, if the political elite and their institutions make constant decisions that are to the detriment of the well-being of the people whom they are supposed to govern, at what point do you have to do away with them? In a non-violent fashion. So I'm not trying to incite a violent uprising here. But I think your question is absolutely justified.
I don't know who it was that said it, Ralph, but someone said, I used to fear revolution. Now I fear we won't have a revolution.
Yes,
but again, Ralph, I said at the top, I consider you to be the people's philosopher, and I would bottle your insight and sell it and make a fortune. Let's talk again very soon, Ralph. But for now, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Neil.